Welcome back to Solitary, Poor, Nasty, Brutish, and Short. Today, Scott Newman sits down with Edward Hadas, a fellow at Oxford's Blackfriars Hall with over 25 years of experience as a financial analyst. He is a writer, academic, and theologian. In this episode, he and Scott talk about the philosophy of money. Enjoy!
Well, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
It's a pleasure.
As a first step, I just want to talk a little bit about your background. You seem like something of a serial degree collector with lots of work experience in between.
No, that's the wrong way of looking at it. I am a serial degree avoider, silly. So when I was young, I went to Columbia in New York, got a BA there studying various things, a combination of philosophy and history and mathematics. And then I won a fellowship to come to Oxford for 2 years.
A Rhodes?
No, a lesser scholarship. I was a Kellett Fellow, which is a Columbia.
I know it well. It's a Columbia thing.
Yeah, it's a Columbia thing, a couple of them every year. And I came here and got a second BA. And as it happened, I was quite young, so I got my second BA. I was only 22 years old. And that was in what they call greats here. So it's classics, and in my case, classics and philosophy. So if there's a common theme, it would probably be philosophy. And then I was thinking, I'd always planned to be an academic. It wasn't like I was sort of vaguely thinking about it. My father was an academic. My grandfather was an academic.
Wow. Long line.
Inherited obligation and of interest and a passion. And so, but life got in the way, and
as it does,
as it can happen. And I had a young family very quickly, and my wife and I thought about it, and we thought the vagaries of academic life being what they were, maybe it would be a good thing to go into finance. So I did. And in order to get into finance, I got an MBA. So it sounds like a lot of degrees, but actually it's not.
But you're from New York, SUNY.
Well, I went to SUNY Binghamton, but that just had to do with complex personal things. I actually grew up in St. Louis mostly.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
But my wife had gone to SUNY Binghamton, and we liked it up there.
Okay.
We had some dreams of country life and something like that.
Yeah.
I will say that finance and country life are not. Well, now you can do them because you can work remotely, but in those days, that was a dream. So that would be all the way back. I started my first professional job in 1980, and then
as a trader? Or?
No, I was an analyst.
Yeah.
So the theory was I had analytic abilities because that's what you learn when you study philosophy and things like that.
All right.
And I was curious about the.
But where were you? You were at a bank or what?
I started out at a bank, and then I worked on both the buy side and the sell side. So I had all sorts of experiences. Always an equity analyst, except then in 2004. I left the U.S. in '89. We moved first to France and then to London. Still doing the same kind of work, but it's sort of a sense of adventure or something that brought us to Europe, and lived in London. And then in 2004, I got fired from one job, and I thought this was a good moment to change my career. So I became a financial journalist. And the precondition of taking the job was that I could be an economics writer instead of just an industry writer. So I'd been an industry analyst for my entire career, but I'd gradually become more interested in the entire economy. And my new employer was so desperate that they let me do what I wanted to do. And so after a little bit, I became economics editor at this thing that was called Breaking Views, which was then taken over by Reuters during the financial crisis. So it was then Reuters Breaking Views. And I worked there with the exception of a year at the Financial Times. I worked there until I retired from full-time writing in the end of 2016. And I worked as a freelancer for them, writing a weekly column for another year or two. And that's the end of my professional career. And so I then came up here. When I retired, I came up to Oxford. Really, I didn't have any very clear idea of what I was going to do, but I, by that time, had written a book on money and
Which
sort of
one?
ethics of capitalism, really, or of money.
What is the title of this?
That book is called, what is it called? Human Goods, Economic Evils,
Yeah.
A Moral Look at the Dismal Science. And that was published by
about
ISI Books in 2007. And then I started after that to write a book on Catholic social teaching because I'd given some lectures on that. And someone said, you should write into this book. And I said, oh, yes, that will be easy. It'll take me a few months. 7 years later, it was finished. So the scale and ambition grew as I started writing it. But in between those two, I came up to Oxford, and I had a friend who someone had gotten in touch with, who was at Blackfriars Hall here. He was a priest, and I asked him for some advice. What should I do with my life right now? And he said, well, why don't you stay here and we'll make you a visiting fellow. And that's actually how I got here after I was there for a visiting fellow for 1 year. They changed my title and I became a research fellow. This is, as they put it, a non-stipendiary position, but it was a very nice place to be. And I was there for 7 years in total. And that ended last year. And now I'm an employee of the university, working for the Department of Continuing Education in their political economy department. So that's what I do.
Teaching the study abroad students.
And I also teach study abroad students, yeah. So I teach students at the Stanford program, Stanford University. It's a program called CMRS, Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies. And there are a few others that I've been known to teach at. And that I teach, there's a sort of chronic shortage of experienced people to teach one-on-one tutorials that the American students like to have.
Right.
So I do that. I teach philosophy, some economics, and I'm always open to new ideas of what to teach, but I really love teaching undergraduates. And yeah, so that's mostly what I do, and I write books. I mean, I've written another book on money and finance, which I'm happy to say was just translated into Chinese. I was just in China for 10 days promoting my Chinese translation of my book. And I am finishing a book on the nature of modernity. So that's a very philosophical topic. And I have many books planned. So I'm old, so we'll see how many I can get done before I am too old to write, but I have many plans.
We'll see. And you're also somehow, amidst all of this, doing a PhD.
Oh, yeah, but the PhD is don't get carried away. It's a PhD by published works. So in practice, this means that I have to write an essay of 15,000 words, and I submit bits of what I've published up to now, and they will hopefully give me a PhD. So
that's here or that's elsewhere?
No, that's at St. Mary's University, Twickenham, where I know a couple of people who were very happy to help me get this. And this is not because I have some huge desire for a PhD. It's because there are various things that I would like to do that people have said maybe that I could do if I had a PhD.
You had a PhD.
So my son refers to this as a mail order PhD. And
it's a little bit more than that. You have written.
I have written the books. He will, after he says that, he will sometimes take that back and say, well, of course you have written the books. It's just a matter of getting certified for having done something. There's a long tradition. Oxford is one of the last places where senior professors got PhDs or doctorates. And if you're in any of the humanities, you'll have a long list of topics that of distinguished professors who were here up to the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Who didn't have PhDs. Yeah, it wasn't a requirement.
But now Oxford has succumbed to the fashion of the age. And
in more ways than one.
Well, many
ways than one.
In many ways.
One of my gripes about the place, but they also like to hold on to quite a bit. They're reticent to shake some things too. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, and the tension here between the colleges, which in many ways would like to be more traditional and have the bigger endowment, that holds Oxford from becoming merely a science university or a trade school or something. So it's a creative tension, I like to hope.
Well, there's so many directions that this could go, but I figure we'll just start with an easy question. What is money?
What is money? Okay. Money is. We actually know what money is. This is one of one of the places where we've made substantial progress in economics. So, 200 years ago, most economists, such as they were then, they didn't use the name, pretty much assumed that money was a precious metal. It was a commodity that you could use to buy things. And the nature of money was that it was something that was scarce and valuable. And this is a story that is told. Adam Smith, the first, well, he's often considered the father of modern economics, assumed that when the history of getting rich is often described as a history of finding gold or silver, because that was money. And that turns out not to be true. I mean, it just isn't true in the sense that gold is a kind of money, but it's not what money is. The commodity theory of money, which is an individualistic theory. So if money was basically gold, then I could have money and not have any community at all. The gold becomes the source of my community. But it turns out that when we build a modern economy, what we need to do to have money is you need to have someone issue the money. You need to have a communal agreement that this is money. And then we look back and we see that actually it wasn't the gold, it was the stamp on the gold that made it money. So it might be, if you were trading from one current country to another, you would notice how much gold there was in the coin, but within your country, it was the coin itself that had the value. And that value, that monetary value, comes not from the gold, but from the guarantee of the government. So when philosophers have started to think
Guarantee
through,
of what? If the coin itself is gold.
Yes. So there's the philosopher I use is John Searle, who is a linguistic philosopher in California. And he's still barely alive. I mean, I believe he's alive. I haven't heard the contrary. And he talks about it as a baseless token. And what that means is that we believe it has value because we believe it has value, or I believe it has value because you believe it has value. And if everyone believes it has value, then it has value. And so the value of it comes from the shared belief that it has value. As a philosopher, he's very interested in what he calls speech acts. And this is where if I say in the right way, at the right time, in the right mode, I marry you, then the fact of saying it makes the marriage true. And in this case, the fact of everyone sharing the belief that the money has value is what gives it value, which seems circular, but that's the way it is. And so we sometimes need some reassurance that money has value, that I'm right to say this. And that's where the gold used to come in. As you say, well, okay, if you say so, it has gold. It has gold in it, so that makes it likely that the government knows what it's doing when it says it has value. So what money is a baseless token. It's a way of a token of value. Doesn't have anything underneath it. It's not supported by assets. It's not supported by gold, by any kind of commodity. It's only supported by the goodwill, the faith and trust, whatever it says in the U.S. dollar bills, that it's legal tender, you can use it. So it's part of the structure of law of a country. It's a particular kind of structure. Now, I've been saying this, and I'm by no means alone in this. When I say we know, it's because pretty much every economist in the mainstream, and I'm often not in the mainstream, but in this case I am, recognizes that money is in some way a token of that is what money has its value from, is the agreement of value. And so, I mean, this is not, as it were, a surprise anymore. But it took a long time, and even Keynes in the middle of the 20th century, the early part of the 20th century, was unclear about this. and there's a fascinating debate in the 19th century in this country, in the UK, or England as it was then, it was thought of between the bankers who understood that money comes out of loans. You lend people money, and that becomes money by creating it. And the bullionists who believed that you needed gold bullion. The compromise between them was the gold standard, where you pretended that you could change your money into gold, but of course you couldn't really. Or you could change any small amount into gold, but you couldn't really do that. You couldn't really expect all of the money to be turned into gold because there was so much more money on issue than there was gold in the treasury. And it took a long time to sort of get this straight. In the U.S. in 1973, President Nixon took the country off the gold standard. They broke the Bretton Woods debate.
The end of
an era of a sort.
Yeah.
But it was really the recognition that money, that you couldn't base money on gold and also have inflation. You couldn't say the price of gold will always be $35 an ounce unless the value of money was the same. And you realize that actually the gold was a auxiliary to this. I have a lot of friends who just don't want this to be true. I was talking to someone, another philosopher, and he said, "I'm not a gold bug, but actually, I think he probably is a gold bug in the sense that gold must be the ultimate store of value, but there is no ultimate store of value. The value is in the economy, not in the money."
But I mean, I think today, right? Like I deposit $100 in the bank, right? As soon as that money goes into the bank, it's digits on a screen.
Right.
It's not dollars held at the bank. It's redeemable for dollars held at the bank. And then, I mean, because of fractional reserve banking, the bank may not even have all of my $100 at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like what you're saying is the conference of value is really just such that we all agree. But this presents a problem, Edward. Some people can just say, "Oh, well, I opt out. I won't participate in this." Now, that runs into some practical issues. Well, your landlord may say, "That's great that you've opted out, but I'm not going to accept Chuck E. Cheese tokens. I want gold tokens
right.
or dollars." People have invented their own currencies. People have trade all the time in things which are not currencies. But I just wonder, like, less yeah. I don't know. I'm not satisfied so far.
I'm sorry.
And maybe I'll never be in my lifetime.
Well, I hope so. I hope we could bring you at least a little bit around. So let's think about this as another way of thinking about money is it's an organizational tool. And so if we think of, and this is part of my shtick in economics, is often when people talk about the economy, they start with money. And this is pretty much mainstream in the sense of Marxists and capitalists and really all the way back from the 17th century. The assumption was that what we are talking about when we talk about economics is money related. And if it's not measurable by money, it can't really be part of the economy. We have to assume or give some imputed monetary value because, as it were, the currency of economic thinking is money. And I want to really change that. I want to think that, and this is what my first book was about, that what we do as humans is what's really important in the economy. And that has been identified since Aristotle, but not focused on by economists, is the human activity of making things and then consuming them. So we labor. That labor is organized in some kind of system of production. It takes advantage of the goods of the world, the fields, the seeds, the metals. and it produces things ultimately. The goal of the production is to produce things that we can consume: houses, food, roads. We use them or we use them up. And economists, I think correctly, call both of the using and the using up consumption. And that process is a human process. To some extent, it's even an animal process. The beavers make dams and catch food and whatever. So, but as a human process, we do what humans do. We organize it. We give it symbolic meaning. We try to make it make sense in some way, make sense of the world. And as it turns out, once it gets even the least bit complicated, in the sense that I'm laboring for myself, I'm not growing my own grains and eating them, making my own cloth from the sheep that I've, been growing and so forth. I'm not self-sufficient. I start to deal with other people. And if we look at the history of economics or of economies, economic history, what we discover if we try to avoid thinking about the money-using part is that for most of human history, for most people, 70, 80%, there was little or no money. You could go through your whole life and never see a coin because you
basically the feudal people,
the feudal people who are most of the people. They don't write the records. We know very little about them.
Yeah,
but we could kind of make some estimates of how many there were.
Oh, we have Anna Karenina.
Yeah, right. And they might see money once in a while. By the time you get to Anna Karenina in the 19th century, they probably had some experience with money. But their basic daily lives was they fed themselves. They gave tribute to the Lord in kind, in grain, or in labor hours. And
why is that not money? The grain, the things that you use for stuff.
Well, you could think of it as money, but if you're just giving
I could pay Mac with a bicycle.
You could, but he wouldn't be too happy. And Mac might say, if I say, I'm going to pay you with a lecture about economics, he would say, well, what good is that to me?
So we don't all agree. It's good. It's a value to you, but not of, I'll give you Shakespeare, but you, in fact, you prefer Charles Dickens.
Right. Or you say, what I can give you is, I say, I can give you a lecture on the nature of economics. And you say, well, I want to eat, hamburger.
Yeah.
And I say, well, okay.
I should try this. I mean, maybe I'll try this with a friend. He'll be like, hey, can I bring anything to the party? I'll be like, yeah, bring a bottle of wine. I say, no, I think maybe what I'll bring is a goldfish.
Right. And you say, well, what good is that? Or you say, what I'll bring you is my latest video, and you should really be grateful. And maybe he will be. But
well, maybe the easier way to think about this in a way that maybe will also resonate with members of my listenership, if that's a word, is to think about crypto, which is a relatively new phenomenon that a lot of people have gotten together and decided has value. So if we think about a new kind of currency, which is not related to any particular government, but people still come in, there's a market for it. The price is fluctuating. There's, supply and demand going back and forth. So how do we approach it? Still, everyone just buys in. But the second that everyone says, actually, this happens a lot with new coins that are minted, then it loses value and people move on.
Right. So that's a perfect example of what money is. As long as everyone agrees that crypto, some currency, Bitcoin is money, it's money. And as soon as they stop thinking it's money, it's not money.
So we could, as long as we all agreed that tulips have value, we can trade tulips. But at such a point as the value goes to zero.
Well, it's not that we trade tulips, that's secondary. It's that we can use tulips to buy hamburgers and lectures.
Yes, okay.
But
only while everyone believes that tulips are exchangeable for totally unrelated things.
Exactly. So
that's maybe a feature of money, not a definition that it has to, or maybe it's definitional, but it has to be exchangeable for totally
so
different kinds of entities.
That's exactly right. So the definition of money, when you say, what is money? I'd like to say it's a baseless token. What is the purpose of money? So that's sort of the material of money. Let's say Aristotle, the material cause of money. The thing that it's made of is nothing. And then what's it good for? How can we tell if it's really being money? There are lots of things that are made of nothing. What makes it money in the sense of its use, its purpose, is that you can exchange it for goods and services, for labor. So we can use it to buy things. And if you can't use it to buy things, then it's something else. So Bitcoin right now is basically something else. You can use it for illegal transactions, and people will accept it in illegal transactions. But
legal transactions.
And use it for legal transactions. But why would you? It has huge transaction costs, and the value will change from the time you set the price to this. So if you say, I'm going to pay you $1,000 in Bitcoin, I'm really using the $1,000. The Bitcoin is merely like a bank that happens to have a computer system. The Bitcoin is not really relevant to that transaction. If you say, I'm going to pay you 1 Bitcoin or 1/10 of a Bitcoin or whatever, then
which is not something that people say.
No. Well, they do they don't even say this in illegal things. They say, I want, $100,000, pay me in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So the Bitcoin is merely a transfer mechanism in that case to avoid.
No, because the value is fluctuating so constantly, you can't say this costs 2 Bitcoin.
So one of the ironies of Bitcoin is that when people tell you 2 stories about Bitcoin, they say, well, it has a limited supply. And so
it's a fixed supply cap.
So it can't inflate away the way that government issued money inflates. And so it has a stable value.
Sounds good to me.
It does sound good if you think of it as truly stable. So the prices will fall in Bitcoin if you were to use it as a general currency, because or you could put that as the Bitcoin value will rise because there's not going to be an increase in the supply of Bitcoin. And they say, so it's going to be a much better currency than the dollar or the pound because it's inflation protected. They then say, so that's claim 1, is that it's inflation protected and that makes it a better currency. And the value is going to look how much the price has gone up. And you say, well, one of the things I want in a currency is some kind of stability in pricing. I want my wage to be reasonably constant, my prices to be reasonably constant. The idea of a currency where its value fluctuates by 5 or 10 or 20% in a day, where it's increased the price or thus decreased the value of against dollars. Sorry, it's increases value against dollars is that it would then be so unstable is the exact opposite of what you mean by a good currency. So your pitch for buying Bitcoin as something that's value is going to go up is completely contradictory to your pitch for buying Bitcoin, that it's a very stable source can be a replacement for money. It cannot be a replacement for money if the price is going to go up at extravagant levels against currency every day. It's not going up against the dollar because the dollar is inflating at 4%. That's not the source of the change of value. It's the speculative fervor or fever even, that changes the value of Bitcoin. And so people throw in this whole thing about how it's going to be money, but it's a lot more like buying fine art. Get in on this artist before he gets famous, and then it's going to make you a fortune. That's what Bitcoin is, except in our modern age, we don't have any, we don't really have fine art, so we have,
Maybe I'd maybe prefer a world in which we traded fine art rather than dollars. Everyone could have little trinkets of fine art.
We could have trinkets of fine art, right. But in practice, the money that we use to pay wages and prices is the money that is in the economy, and things that are outside of the economy that we put money in. I make the argument in my latest book, which I will make in a talk in Oxford in a few weeks.
And you'll maybe make right now.
And I will make right now I will not just maybe, I will definitely make this right now. Is that there's an ontological difference between the money that is circulating to buy in the economy of money and in the economy of labor and consumption. And some of it circulates via the government in that economy, but this is the human activity. This is what we're doing. And money is our lubricating token for this. And it allows us to go to the supermarket and buy 100 things with the same currency, and to be paid in that currency. So all of our labors together in this currency zone are put together, and then they're taken apart. The fruits of our labors are then taken apart and given to us. So you fly across the ocean. This is the example I always use. 1 million people have contributed to that flight. Someone who's made the steel or the aluminum or the plastic or done the research. There's someone who's standing at the airport. There's someone, and you're paying for all of that. Your ticket of whatever, 500 pounds, is paying every one of these 1 million people eventually some tiny portion of your 500 pounds. It's an amazing accomplishment to be able to combine all this labor, consume this one thing, and then make sure that everyone's rewarded for their labor from your consumption of this combination. That's an amazing thing, and that's what money is particularly good for. Then sometimes we take money out of the economy and we put it aside. You were talking about putting it in the bank. To some extent, that money, insofar as it's your money in the bank, it's outside of the economy. The banks have this kind of ambiguous ontology where they also then lend money and put money, and they say that's your money that's being lent. There's a lot of theory that goes on in trying to say what's really happening there. But conceptually, it's really quite easy. As you say, either the money is being used for this human activity of labor and consumption and trying to organize it within an economy, or it's being taken out of the economy and saved. And I call this one, I call token money inside the economy. Outside the economy, I call it savings money. And you can see that in their essence and what they're doing, they're quite different. So savings money is supposed to hold value over time. It's supposed to sometimes supposed to increase.
Of course,
value.
You never really even out of the economy unless it's in truly just a checking account that's not earning interest. People are keeping money in cash equivalents and money markets, whatever. Then
so
you could
the
say,
border I say in the book is fuzzy.
Yeah.
So you can see some connection. That may be held in a stock, common share. It's going to have a dividend. Which will come out of the profits in the economy. So there's some kind of connection.
That's at work. That's at work. Holding stock is putting the money to work.
Well, it's not work like human work. It's a tribute. You could do.
It is human work because the companies have employees that they need to pay, and contractors and whatever.
Sure, but the profits
and your one share is contributing.
Yeah, but you're not. Well, I mean, that's a long hypothetical claim. It's the sort of the rationale of saying that you deserve something for having a share is that in some very distant sense, you
risked your capital in order to give it to Coca-Cola so that they could pay the guy who built the vending machine.
Yeah, eventually, in some very abstract sense, but
I understand. So you're saying one way of looking at money is the money that's actually lubricating all of this human interaction.
That's right.
What's the second one?
The second one is that it's a store of value. So when you take economics, they say money is three things. It's a unit of account, it's a store of value, and it's a medium of exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Medium of exchange is what I'm talking about, roughly speaking, in terms of token money. But I want to focus that it's not a medium of exchange so much as a tool of organization to try and coordinate and adjudicate what we do in the human activity. Store of value, a unit of account is irrelevant. It dates from before there was enough money around, and so people didn't have money, but they pretended they had money by making an account. Now there's lots of money.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, sorry. So unit of account is, you would say, I owe you $10, but I have no money right now because there was a shortage of money for most of the Industrial Revolution. Because they wanted to keep the supply of money.
But how did opening an account pretend that you have money?
Because at some point in the future, when you would get the money. No, I mean, it would be accounts receivable, say.
An IOU.
Yeah, an IOU becomes like money, but it's denominated.
Oh, so I could give you an IOU, and then you could give Mac the IOU, and then Mac could give it to
and that's starting
Veronica.
to look like money. but until we
Well, that's how mortgages work.
yeah, okay. But what we're trying to get at here,
We're going to get to mortgages too. We're going to get to the
okay,
GFC,
um,
but they'll stay on
okay.
one thing at a time.
So what I'm trying to get at here is simply that money is current. Token money is current. It's paying for your labor, and it's paying for your consumption. It's what we do to organize the economy as we go through it. And then you can take the money out, and it becomes savings money, and it may have some, as you point out, various connections with the actual economy, but it doesn't pay for labor directly. It doesn't pay for consumption. It sits there, and what's striking about it is that we expect to be able to bring it back into the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's intertemporal. We have financial instruments that last over time, and we worry a lot about the value, the change in value of those instruments over time. But token money doesn't work that way. It's basically instantaneous. So you get paid for your work, roughly speaking, as you do it. Maybe a week or a month you have to wait. But your basic pay for your labor comes with the labor. Your basic pay for your consumption comes with your consumption. And so it's part of the world of human activity day to day. And the savings money has a different way of being. It's something that exists over time. You can put it in the mattress. You said put it in the checking account. My favorite example is taking dollar bills and putting them in a mattress.
Yeah,
They're
sure.
totally outside of the economy. They're sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
Putting them in gold is the same thing. You say, I've got 3 ounces of gold. They're sitting in my living room or my safe deposit or my safe, and it's completely out of the economy. There's no economic value whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
That's the purest savings money. It's just sitting there. Of course, the only reason you have it is that someday you expect you or your children or your grandchildren to bring it back into the economy. But right now, it has no economic use. It's just sitting there. And then we have these sort of mixed things that are somewhere at the edge between the actual economy and this kind of social valuation that lasts over time, which is our savings money. Mm. Those are the financial instruments. So that's the idea. And I think that's an important distinction. So in my book, I talk about a triptych. On the middle is the economy with money. On the left is the money without the economy, or on the outside of the economy. And on the right is the economy without money. So you have, say, a mother who's taking care of her children. She's laboring. She needs to eat. And she is in the economy in the sense that she's doing housework and care work, but she's not being paid for it. And so we want to think of the economy as sometimes monetary and sometimes not monetary. That's, to me, very important because I want to validate the value of non-monetary labor and denigrate the relative importance of money in understanding the economy. I want to think about money as a tool that we use for better or for worse within the economy, but not as the center of the economy. The center of the economy is the labor and the consumption, the things that we do together and for ourselves as human beings trying to live a good life.
What are some examples? Like is courting a future spouse part of that?
There's an element of labor in courting a future spouse.
Sure.
And so,
or of painting, of doing, things that make us human.
Yeah.
Which are not necessarily money is remunerated. I don't get paid to have courted my girlfriend.
So it's not the only thing that we do. So, we love, we have beauty, we worship, we create art.
You don't get paid to go to church.
Right. But it's not that we don't get paid. It's that we have different parts
your
of
labor.
Our,
the
labor of
the one foot in front of the other is not remunerated.
So when someone says, "Oh, what do you do? What's your labor?" and they say, "Well, I'm a composer," and if you think of it as kind of labor, you think, well, do you have a computer that you put notes on? Write your music, or do you have a pen and you have a piece of paper? That's the kind of labor aspect of it. But what's on your mind as a composer is the artistic side of it. And you might think of the labor as a sort of drag that is part of your artistic effort. So when I wrote this book, one of the very few people who reviewed it was harassing me correctly. I mean, that's like, she was right to say your border between labor and other parts of the human condition is very unclear. And I'm happy to admit that it's very unclear. So that's not, to me, I mean, it's a weakness in the sense that if you want this to be a very complete sort of total model, then we're going to have to try and define exactly where the border is. But there's a pretty obvious idea of labor. It's connected with toil. It's connected with the sort of need of being alive, and a certain set of accomplishments like building things that we can think of as labor, and aspects of other things like politicians' work. They're doing something different. They're governing, but they're also doing some labor in there. And that's my idea. That's the sort of basic idea that I have.
So we have a dual. So money serves two purposes.
Right. Getting back to money.
So the simple, the one paragraph.
The one paragraph. The elevator pitch is that
two ideas.
Two ideas. Money helps the economy run. Money is a social thing that lasts over time, that tries to create value over time, but outside of the economy while it's creating that value.
Okay. So this has been the descriptive.
Right.
Now maybe we turn to the CST and we go to the normative.
Okay.
But we don't have where we could do a million podcasts on this. There's only so many hours today and so many, lifetimes that each of us could live to go through this. The normative question I would like to ask is not about what money should be writ large. It's more practical for the individual. What role you think money should play in the lives of individuals?
Okay. There are various ways of, I mean, as you say, this is a big topic. So I think the easier way to think about it is what money shouldn't pay in the role of the life of individuals.
Well, let's look at the sins, like many, there's a seven deadly sins. They could all be related to money.
Yes.
Avarice, mammon.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Do we see the negative case?
Right. So the negative case is that people put too much faith in money. There's a particular idea that comes up. I mean, you mentioned Simmel before, is this idea of quantification, that money puts a number onto things. And humans aren't really geared in our normal lives to think in numerical terms about good and bad or our desires. So if I say, as this example I always use, I have two friends, I like this one 17% more than that one, you think there's something wrong with the way, you shouldn't count that. And if you say I have two pieces of pie and this pie is nicer than that, if I say it's 18% nicer, that might be useful for a certain kind of marketing exercise. I rate my hospital satisfaction on 1 to 5, and we say we've moved from 4.2 to 4. But it isn't.
I tell my friend, I like that outfit 12.5% more than this.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to say, what are you talking about? That doesn't even make sense. But money encourages us to think in those terms. And so one of the dangers of money, and this is something that was remarked on from the 19th century or even earlier, is that it seems to turn us into numbers rather than puts our life in a numerical framing that we should try to avoid. So, I once had a conversation with a friend of my mother's who was talking about his trip to England, and I said, did you enjoy it? What did you get out of it? And he said, well, we stayed at this Holiday Inn. It was an incredible bargain. And I said, well, if you did a better bargain to stay home, if that's the way you're going to look at this. Yeah. But, his whole sense of, I could have paid £200 a day, but I paid 140.
You got that all the time. That was a steal.
Yeah.
That was
and instead of saying, well, I don't.
Then you still spent
I'm still thinking, I want you to think, was London lovely? You can then say it wasn't worth the money. That seems fair, or was worth the money. But it gets in the way of seeing the world.
Mm.
And that's sort of the downside of money. So what should we do with money? We should use it. It's a way, what role does it play in our life? It is exactly that organizational tool. It changes my labor into my consumption. And I have to think about how much consumption I want to have, what's good for me. There's some kind of virtue here. But the money isn't necessarily that helpful in understanding the virtue. So I might say, if I'm a Christian, I might say I should be moderate in my economic desires and my desire for consumption, or I should have a job that is good for my character or my family, and I should model make my consumption go with that good job rather than the other way around. So I shouldn't say I need a job that's going to live up to my consumption standards. I should set my consumption standards down to the good job. Those are kind of questions we can ask, and money can help us answer them. But the question is really not a monetary question. It's a question about the good life. And money is often, our looking at it through monetary lens is useful, but it can also be misleading.
I think it can be spiritually misleading, and we don't even need to get into one particular religion, or one particular religious doctrine. I think the thing that we see frequently come up in literature and history is the worship of money as an end unto itself.
Yeah.
So as a good, right? But it's paradoxical because we read all these novels, we see all these episodes in history. The pursuit of endless riches rarely leads to.
So one of the basic sort of
hard to, you're not satiated,
right?
But you can never be satiated.
And here savings money can be helpful. So there are two ways of wanting more in monetary terms. If we think I want more token money, what we're trying to say is I want more stuff. I want to have not one house, but 2 houses and 4 houses. I want not just caviar, but the best caviar. Because token money is being spent all the time. That's the nature of token money. And so what I'm really saying, if I want more token money, is I want more consumption. Whereas savings money is abstract. I can have an infinite amount of savings money. I mean, my consumption gets tired after a while. There's only so much I can actually consume. I suppose I could have more consumption money and give it to you and give it to my friends and so forth. But as Aristotle points out a long time ago, when we think about savings money, he doesn't quite have the conceptual grasp here, there's no limit to it. It doesn't correlate with anything necessarily. You can just get more of it.
And yet people still, there are few, not many, but few who amass enormous fortunes and spend very little of it.
Yeah. There's a long tradition of misers, but as you say, that's sort of gone out of fashion. Sam Walton, founder of Walmart, lived in a modest house and drove an old pickup and so forth. And
Chuck Feeney, the founder of General Atlantic.
Oh yeah.
He drove like a broken Volvo.
Right.
Wore, holes with holes.
You separate out your actual, not just your wealth, your savings money, but you see as yourself as having a very modest token income, token money income, and that's how you live. And there really is a different psychological process where there's sort of psychological orientation in savings money because it doesn't have any reality. It doesn't have any consumption. It has a kind of symbolic meaning of your status or something, or maybe your political power that you get from having this money, or
your influence
in one way or another. But it doesn't really affect your consumption. And the danger of something that's available in a infinite degree, like savings money, is that you never, as you say, you're never satiated, because there's always more. I once worked with a man who had accumulated what was by then a very large, and it was a long time ago, he had $80 million, but he felt a failure because the country club or whatever that he wanted to join had $100 million net worth limit, minimum,
Yeah.
and he just, he hadn't reached the top of his
Right.
profession. But that if he had 100 million and could join the country club, he would still be thinking, that guy's got 200 million. I'm not
That's
the
the losing game.
That's
And yet we all play it.
uh,
This is someone's always going to have a nicer car.
right. And so, and you can have the best car, but you can't have the most money, because there's always some more money you could have in savings money terms. And so there's particular frustration about accumulating savings money because there's no limit to it. Whereas there is at least some sort of conceptual sense of, I could not live in terms of my consumption any better than I'm living now. Now, people are jealous. There's all sorts of problems here. But I think money, in a way, token money gets a bad rap. I think it's exaggerated how bad money is. The danger of money is the way that it depersonalizes us and quantifies us. It's not that we become greedy. We're greedy for things, and that's a different problem from being greedy for savings money.
Too much token money is too much consumption.
Yeah, that's right.
So that is a bad rap.
That's a problem. But I want to focus. I want to focus on the too much consumption desire, not on the too much money desire. Whereas in savings money,
they're correlated.
They are certainly correlated. Yes,
because I only want the nice caviar if I even know what it is, if I can afford it. Right?
Sure.
At such a point as you reach your threshold. I mean, so look, you went to Columbia, you teach kids from Stanford. I went to Princeton, and you know what? It's probably the same story as it was for you when you graduated as it is now. Most people from Princeton, I think, is like, if I forget the exact statistics, but the gold standard is investment banking, management consulting, tech. There's a few people who go to like law school, med school, whatever, but that's what people want to march off into.
Right.
And my contention is that it's not even about money. It's about prestige and status and what is considered to be elite and difficult to obtain, right? So when you're teaching these Stanford undergrads who come here for the summer, they're trying to learn, and that a lot of these kids are just going to, march into VC, march into banking, march into whatever. What message do you want to impart to these 20-year-olds about money and the role that you think money should play in their lives?
Well, I
know you're not proselytizing here, but
I like the evangelizing a little bit. I teach humanities, so one of the things that I try to help them to see when I teach is that life is as complicated and rich in other things than money. So I do, I think it's sort of incumbent on people teaching history or philosophy or literature. I mean, I don't teach all of those, but I teach philosophy and sometimes a little bit of theology, to try and help them to see that, just not that you shouldn't go necessarily into VC, but that there are more things in life than your salary or your income, or even, your net worth. So that seems to me something one can discuss with people, and I do. They often are quite interested, but of course I wouldn't take courses in philosophy if they weren't probably a little bit interested in that. But what I would say more to the sort of underlying question is, what you just said is, I agree very strongly, is that people are interested in status, and sometimes they measure their status in money. And so money
Sure.
gets involved with that. My salary, my savings, those are questions that help us to determine our status. And particularly in the contemporary world, other sources of status have become, I think it's fair to say, less significant. So if you're a priest, you don't tend to be worrying about your money. You tend to want to be a bishop if you're an ambitious priest. And that's a status thing. I mean, you're supposed to be humble and not want it at all, and many do, and whatever. But if you're a status-hungry priest, you don't think, can I get a higher salary? You think, can I?
Sure. It's the same as politics, right? It's hard to quantify units of influence, right?
Right.
Or an influencer, right? you can actually, it's easier, an influencer, you can quantify the number of followers or likes or subscribers or whatever. But if you're in the political realm, you're not going to be earning as much as you would in the private sector. And the vast majority of countries, there's obviously a few exceptions. I think we should, at least in the US, I think we should pay civil servants better than we do so that we can get smarter people in there. But that, the status, I think, in the modern world among high achieving individuals is either pursued via power, and not necessarily fiscally rewarded power. Like you think of a person like Robert Moses, who wielded enormous power
Sure.
without amassing a considerable fortune himself, and money.
Yeah.
And you need one to play with the other. If you want to play with the whales, you need to have power, and if you want to have power, you're going to eventually need to play with the whales.
Yeah. So sociology is complicated, and money plays a role. That's fair, and I think money, both senses of money, that is to say, the money that you earn and spend, your consumption, and also the money that you save, your wealth, and the kind of net worth you have, are both part of the picture of status, power, authority. There's not a simple picture to be drawn. And often when I talk to people about economics, they assume there's some simple picture that you can draw. That is to say, it's all about money, or it's all about status, and it's not about money. But it's about both, and they interact. And as you say, at a certain point, it's hard to have much status in our culture without some money. And sometimes it's hard to have money without gaining some status. Although
that's not exactly what
that's
I said,
not exactly, but okay.
Yeah.
But there tend to be an interaction between the two, at least at a high level.
There does. Oh boy, there's so many directions. I would like to. You're such an interesting guy, Edward. You're a polymath. You're extremely well read, clearly, and it's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thank you.
I just want to say that. So we'll keep going for a few minutes, and
Okay.
then we'll wrap.
I'm very happy to talk about many different things. So,
well, I saw that you're teaching this class about development.
okay.
Yes. Is it possible to solve development problems?
Mm-hmm.
It made me think of this quote from the end of a movie called Margin Call.
Margin Call is a great film.
It's a great film. It's about a bank in the early days of 2008 that realizes it's holding an enormous amount of mortgage-backed securities, which are essentially worthless, and the decision made by the CEO of the bank is to do, just for the listeners, what's called a fire sale, which is to sell everything all at once. Once the horses leave the gate, the value is going to start rapidly depreciating, but to just clear your books of the thing that you no longer want on your books. So at the end, there's two characters. Kevin Spacey's character is talking to Jeremy Irons' character, and Jeremy Irons delivers this sort of monologue. I will read it here as it is in the film, and I don't mean to offend you, but there's a bit of profanity in here.
That's fine. I can take it. I worked in finance for many years.
So Kevin Spacey's character has completed the fire sale, and he's showing some regrets about this. He's morally conflicted, and he goes to Jeremy Irons, who's the CEO, and this is what Irons says. So you think we might have put a few people out of business today, that it's all for naught. You've been doing that every day for almost 40 years, Sam. And if this is all for naught, then so is everything out there. It's just money. It's made up. Pieces of paper with pictures on it so we don't have to kill each other to get something to eat. It's not wrong, and it's certainly no different today than it's ever been. 1637, 1797, 1819, 37, 57, 84, 1901, 07, 29, 1937, 1974, 1987. Jesus, didn't that fuck me up but good. 92, 97, 2000, and whatever we want to call this. It's all just the same thing over and over. We can't help ourselves. And you and I can't control it or stop it or even slow it or even ever so slightly alter it. We just react. And we make a lot of money if we get it right. And we get left by the side of the road if we get it wrong. And there have always been, and there always will be, the same percentage of winners and losers, happy fucks and sad sacks, fat cats and starving dogs in this world. Yeah, there may be more of us today than there's ever been, but the percentages, they stay exactly the same.
Is this right? Your question is. The answer is.
That's not quite my question.
All right.
How would you respond to this eloquently delivered monologue by Jeremy Irons?
Jeremy Irons gives, that's a great monologue, and the one earlier about explain this to me as if I was a golden retriever is a very good speech too. Anyway, it's a great film, and it really raises some of these important questions about the morality of this. So the book that I wrote about money and finance is called Money, Finance, Reality, Morality. And the point is not to talk about all morality, but to talk about the morality of finance. And I actually think that while it's a great speech, it's entirely wrong. That is to say that the reason that we have this recurring problem of financial crises that he goes through, and he hasn't even mentioned all of them in the 19th century, is that we treat finance very differently from other parts of the economy. And finance is, of course, well, maybe it's not of course, but it is basically on that left section, the part of the economy, the part of where money is taken out of the economy and has a very, very distant, if any, relationship to the economy. And so it isn't anchored in the same way that wages and prices are to the actual economy. At some point, if you have too much money going to pay wages and prices, you get inflation, and that has a kind of, people notice it. If you get asset price inflation, people just think it's a good thing. And so my point here when I talk about the morality is that in the real economy, we have some constraints on greed. There's lots of greed. I want a higher salary. I want a lower price. There's lots of ways in which we don't think about our monetary situation and our consumption situation, our labor situation. In terms of justice, we think of it selfishly, and we're greedy for more money, for more token money, for, as I say, higher price, higher income, lower prices. But there's a general sense in the successful modern economy that prices should be roughly fair, wages should be roughly fair. There's a recognition that what I have as a wage is what you don't have. And so we put some limits on greed. But in finance, we welcome greed. We think it's great. Greed is good, said another famous Wall Street movie. But more than that, we think it's, you say, well, I outperform the stock market. Good on you. That's wonderful. And we expect and want to have very high returns on investment. And the notion that you should be moderate in your financial demands is one that seems almost nonsensical in most mainstream finance. And so by welcoming greed, we let to use a nice religious word, we let a sin into it. But we let something in that's disruptive, because greed disorders the way that the financial world works. And so instead of this financial world serving from a distance the economy, serving the society, it becomes something that's greedy. And the infestation of greed leads to bubbles, and then to busts, and then to financial problems. And so instead of having finance be a communal service of some sort, and it can be if you designed it that way, it becomes a kind of greedy monster and causes these regular disruptions. And I'll give an autobiographical response here too, is I was there in the 2008 financial crisis. I was a journalist. I was relatively new at that business. And it was all rather appalling because no one really understood what was going on. We all had to become experts in all sorts of weird things very quickly as a journalist. And what I recognized was that the one core issue was that the banks and the non-bank financial institutions had shown no constraint whatsoever about doing things that were high risk and could possibly blow out the system. They were just completely interested in spreading, taking in money. And that was a kind of intuition. I'd been a banks analyst before I was a journalist. And I remember thinking about how these banks the shares were very expensive and the banks were being very profitable. And it seemed crazy because it was a competitive business. How could you be making money in a competitive business, like high returns? That's not the way the competitive business should work. They should push down the returns. And the only answer to that question was that they were taking advantage of their clients' greed, and they were able to sell products at very high margins, and no one really cared because as long as prices went up, it was all for the good. And what created this book was my editor when I was at Reuters Breaking Views saying to me, Edward, you're always complaining, you're always moaning, you're writing articles about what's wrong, but you never tell us what's right. And I tried to think this through and get a coherent idea of what money should be doing and how savings money is different and how our attitude towards savings money, our acceptance of greed, is the structural cause of why finance blows up in a way that nothing else in the economy ever does. You look at every single economic problem, sort of recession, wars, we recover from them much better than we recover from financial crises, and yet we pay less attention to the things that cause financial crises than to the kinds of things that cause economic problems, which is why we have more financial crises, but we somehow have exempted it from our moral scrutiny. So I think that there's a sort of pragmatic thing is we have to rethink finance and think of it as an activity that needs to be morally guided. It cannot be, if we want it not to blow up every once in a while, it has to be not a place where greed is allowed free rein. It's like saying we're going to let lust run free in marriage. It wouldn't be good for marriage. It's like, well, you just have to do what you want to do. It's like the excess is something that we need to control. We need self-mastery of some sort. We need social constraints to encourage us to behave better. Not that we will get rid of greed. That's not within the range of the human condition, but that we can control it and modify it and recognize it and criticize it. That is within our range, and I think we should do that. My little evangelical pitch.
Well, I guess the trick is getting people to
Well, that's right.
interested in doing that. Yeah. I don't think any kind of regulatory approach will maybe not change hearts and minds.
Andy Haldane, who used to be at the Bank of England and now he's doing other things, he used to talk about how the first bank capital regulations, which was basically meant to keep banks from being too reckless, the Basel I standard was on sort of 2 pieces of paper, and the next one, Basel II, was on about 100 pages, and Basel III is like 3,000 pages, and now they're up to Basel IV.
Right.
And he said, something's going wrong, and we just have to keep on multiplying our pages and our rules. There's some problem in the way that people are thinking about what they're doing when they're banking, that they're not able...
The problem is with us. It's not with the banks.
Right. It's not that the rules are bad. It's that we don't want to obey rules that are contrary to
and
our...
it's not with banks. We need banks.
Yes,
banks are good. It's with humans. The problem is with humans.
Right. And humans run banks, and we should think about how we, in our banking... I mean, Many years ago, I wrote a column that was, we used to have a contract in the New York Times, so it came out on Thanksgiving Day on New York Times many years ago, which I compared banking to baking. Add one letter and everything changes.
Right.
And the way banking works, this is during the early parts of the financial crisis, if baking worked the way banking does, one day you would go to the bakery and there would be just so much bread and they're giving it away. And the next day you come there and the bread's like $200 a loaf because something's gone wrong. We can manage the baking industry. We can develop new products. We can do all this stuff. And in banking, for some reason, and the reason is greed, we just seem incapable of controlling ourselves. We give in to our worst instincts all the time. In fact, it's structured around giving in to your worst instincts. You see the advertising you do for investors, and you see, you're appealing to their.
You ever seen anyone advertise modest returns?
That's right. I used to work for a firm, which I will leave nameless, although someone could figure it out. They sort of failed. And they used to say, we think inside the box. We're very modest with our investments, but we give you high returns. And the thing was, it wasn't true. They actually took very high risks, and we almost failed. In fact, we did gradually fail because eventually our clients noticed that we were not really selling what we were advertising. But I remember I was called to a session to discuss this with the marketing manager, and he was showing us the slogan and the ads, and I can't remember why I was called in, but I said, but we don't do that. We don't actually, we are very high risk investors.
Go back to your cubicle.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's not really relevant. This is what people want to be told, and that's what we tell them. Well, there's something really deeply gone wrong here. Now, I'm happy to say that was a step too far, and we eventually failed. We had to be taken over, the firm. But I'm sure they would say, well, they didn't fail, but it was certainly not a success. But that's an extreme, and it was too far even for the finance industry. But the basic idea is that we weren't that different from what everyone else was doing.
There's a scene from Mad Men where Don Draper and whoever else is they're talking about cigarette advertisements, and there there's new like anti-smoking campaigns are happening, and the client is like, all of the Don is like, how do you make the cigarette? And he's like, well, first we do this, then we toast it. And Don goes, perfect, lucky strike, toasted. And he goes, yeah, but every tobacco company toasts the tobacco. He goes, yeah, it doesn't matter. We came up with it first.
That's right.
Do you think that so much of finance is extractive because of this greed innate to the human condition that you're talking about? Like, is it descriptively true to say that much of finance is extractive?
Yeah, I talk in the book about what I call post-aristocratic finance. So in aristocracies, effectively the labor of the poor supports the lifestyles of the rich. So there's a basic poor to rich transfer is kind of the economic direction. In welfare states, we have the opposite. The rich pay more in taxes, and people can say that they should pay even more, and the poor receive more in benefits. So we basically have an economy that's working, and we have in the middle of it this great big government structure that has rich to poor transfers. And then finance is transfers in the other direction. The relatively poor consumers pay high prices so that you can have profits that go to relatively rich investors. It's a statistical thing.
So you're saying there's an aristocratic structure within the welfare state, within the modern welfare
Well,
state.
not the welfare state is anti-aristocratic. But
you have the modern welfare state, but the economy, which is operating within there.
So there's this other social mechanism.
Is a reverse mechanism.
Yeah, it's pointing in another direction. And it's tolerated because we like greed. And it's extremely extractive. I mean, I remember many years ago, and I worked for a big Wall Street firm, and we had a convention of people who were supposed to cooperate or something. And I was asking this guy who was designing derivative products.
Oh, there's a question on here about derivatives.
And he and I said to him, "What's your job? Why do you make these complicated things?" He said, "Well, the point is that as long as the client doesn't really understand what he's doing, we can have a higher margin on the product." And I said, is that, public consumption? Is that what you tell your clients? He said, no, of course not. But that's what we do. And we try and psychologically design a product that appeals to the client's sense of risk in a way that's unrealistic relative to our understanding of what's actually the risk for us taking it. So they think they're taking less risk and are willing to pay a certain amount, or they've gotten rid of more risk than they actually have. And that's how we make money. So the derivatives market, from the point of view of the people designing the products and selling them, is a way of extracting money from ignorant or less knowledgeable clients. If you're a derivatives person, if you get really good, you go and design derivatives. That's where the brains are and the money really is. And one of the things that caused the financial crisis in 2008 was these financial derivatives, something the equivalent thereof. And I remember
the market for derivatives was like, I don't know, hundreds of times larger than the market for the underlying product.
Well, I mean, measuring the size of those markets is a little bit hard to do, but they invented this options pricing model, Black-Scholes, and it involves a certain amount of math and computational power. But the main thing was that if everyone uses the same model to price things about the future, then you can trade. If I've got a completely different guess of what the future is going to be than you have, it's very hard to find a common price. And so when they invented this, there was a consensus that this was the right way of valuing things. I mean, you take courses in finance, and this is what this is worth. But in fact, as was demonstrated in the 2008 crisis, it's only worth that if the pattern of prices stays statistically normal based on historical records. And so it's actually a fraud, but it's a fraud that helps traders. It's an intellectual fraud that allows a giant business to work. And because the derivatives have very short lives, you don't realize that it's actually a fraud. It becomes like money. It becomes true because people are all using the same valuation method. And derivatives serve no economic purpose. I mean, there's some derivatives that serve some economic purpose, but 98% of the derivative trades are merely speculation, gambling, some number like that. I mean, I'm just making up the statistic, but financial derivatives, just crazy. And I mean, I've been in the business. Well, I'm no longer in the business. I haven't been in business for 10 years, but I remember watching these things, the rates business, and that was buying law, changing the duration of your bond portfolio using derivatives. We didn't have that. The financial world probably worked overall better for not having these kind of markets. It certainly didn't work any worse. But what the markets did do is it allowed Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and those firms to extract some money, and it gave jobs to people who were trying to manipulate various things. It's too much of a closed system, so your gains become someone else's losses to a very large extent in finance. And I mean, I remember when they introduced some of these derivatives, and I saw a presentation, and they said, well, the people who can afford to take risks will end up with the riskier securities. But no, it was the people who were too stupid to understand the risks that ended up with the riskier securities. And then when they lost money, it caused financial problems because they were poorly capitalized. So it was exactly the opposite of the sort of logical thing. But that's the way it is with greed. People act stupid.
I just want to close out by asking about your work on COVID. That's what my research is currently looking at. I saw you'd written this COVID-19, Locke, Hegel, and Eschatology.
Yeah, that was a while ago. Okay.
But yeah, just briefly, what were you looking at?
Well, okay, so it's a while ago now, and I'm not sure I would agree with all the things I wrote at the time, but
this was a book or an article?
No, that was an article. I think it was just a Substack piece.
I think the eschatology thing was also separate, but
I tend to throw eschatology around as a word. But what I will say is that it struck me very strongly during the COVID lockdowns, after a few days or weeks of going along with it, that this was all crazy and that we shouldn't be locking down, and that there was something weird about the whole assumption that this was necessary for public health. And I was very struck by the sort of level of fear. We're all going to die, and the sort of the sense that somehow this was saving lives, and this brought me to think a lot about what is the good life? What is the good life that we should have in our community and our society? And the government that orders this, these lockdowns, have they really thought about what the good life is? If they did, I don't think they would have that kind of constraint. And there are many odd things about this, the way that they wouldn't let people take care of their parents when they were dying in old age homes, nursing homes. You think, well, like, how does this work? What's going on here? And so there were many issues that struck me as very against the good of nature. And here you can see that it may seem like I'm talking about something completely different when I talk about finance and I talk about COVID, but really it's the same kind of issue, is that we want to arrange our society, our communities, our states, our political systems in ways that serve the good, the common good, the universal good. And if we are locking people up and making them miserable and delaying children's education and creating all sorts of domestic problems, why are we doing that? Is that really serving the good life? And if it's not, as I think in the case of COVID, it's pretty clear now it wasn't. And I think it was clear pretty much right away. At the very most, you could excuse it for a few months when they thought that they'd done something terrible in Wuhan and they'd released some horrible virus that was going to wipe out humanity. But when that became clear that wasn't the case, then something has gone wrong. There's something wrong with our society. And ultimately, I think you have to look at morality. You have to look at, are we thinking about the good in a coherent way? And the government authorities that made these decisions about COVID, which wasn't for the most part the elected authorities, they delegated the decision-making to public health experts. My view was and is that something has gone wrong with our governance when they make bad decisions like that. And when they don't even, having made the bad decision, they don't have any kind of reckoning that makes any sense to me. So we've had this country, there's been this long COVID commission, but the question of whether the whole approach was right has rarely been asked, even in this long commission. And so something that's, I'm just trying in all the different angles that I have any kind of expertise in, or even curiosity in, trying to bring together the notion of how we as human beings work together, live together, govern ourselves, are governed, how we can or should follow the common good, and how we fall off of it in various important ways. So the financial crisis, we fall off of it because of greed. I think in COVID, we fall off of it largely because of fear, and the fear of death, the fear of suffering. And then we end up, we all die anyway, and we ended up suffering probably a lot more than we would have if we'd faced up to the possibilities, realistically to what this illness was threatening us with. So yeah, a common theme to all of this, I think there is.
I think it gets to a question of you talk about the good life and you use the word bad. I think it's a question of measurement. Like, do we want to measure quantity of lives or quality of lives? And at least the response at the beginning, I was in Australia when this happened, so I had a different experience there than maybe I.
Were you locked into Australia for months?
I was there for like 3 years, actually.
Okay.
It was the Australia's public health response to COVID was extremely heavy-handed. But that's a subject for another day, and maybe a tale that requires wine. But in the UK, and in the US, I think the thinking was not so much about preservation of life quality, but preservation of life quantity. There was a threat. It did kill a lot of people. But when you take measures to mitigate that, like what are the second and third effects of that? I don't think what is conducive to flourishing was necessarily part of the calculus there.
I taught a class, one of the first classes I taught in my current employer, Department of Continuing Education, when I was still a freelancer there. I taught a class on COVID during the pandemic, and
you taught a class on COVID?
Yeah, I had the COVID. And,
but with what data set? I mean, it's 2020.
Well, it was 2021. But
2021. Okay,
so
yeah.
We had some data, and I was really talking about that kind of question: is what are we
measuring?
What's the goal here? And can we measure the quality of life? We can measure quantity of life pretty easily, but the quality is a much harder variable to get at. And we know it when we see it, as it were, and we feel it, or at least we think we do. But I remember I had a slide that said, "There's more to life than being alive," and it was very interesting watching my students in that class that were all adults, as an adult program, the double take. And I said, "What's your problem here? Do you not understand it?" And one very articulate woman said, "Well, I understand it. It just took me a second, and it's just not the way I'm used to looking at things."
Yeah.
I think of medicine as trying to keep you alive, and this was a medical problem. And I said, well, that's a debate to be had, is what kind of problem is it? And what is the goal of medicine? Since we all die anyway, if that's our goal, then medicine is the most gigantic failure, since it always ends that way. So I think that the response to COVID really raises some important social questions about who we are as a society, what we're trying to do, what kind of control mechanisms we have, and how we as citizens or residents respond to those control mechanisms. Those are questions that need to come into the public. And I think the answers we gave in 2020 and 21 were terrible answers. So I think it's a challenge for us to do a better job.
Okay, I always like to end these things with just some more lighthearted stuff. Favorite book and favorite movie?
Oh, I don't know. Favorite book? I'll just tell you a book that I'm reading these days, which is, I'm teaching this actually. I just taught Plato's Timaeus, and I wouldn't say it's my favorite book, but I love to teach that book because it's one of the books that really gets at the mystery of the human condition and the mystery of the universe in a way that is 2,500 years old, but still as live as ever if you let it be. So that would be a good book. Favorite for movie? Well, actually, since we mentioned it earlier, it's not, again, a favorite. I have lots of favorites, but Margin Call was a very good movie about finance. I would recommend it to all one and sundry. Jeremy Irons is an astounding actor, and Kevin Spacey's not far behind, and it actually captures more about the spirit of finance than any film I've seen.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.